Before sunrise, Abu Rawash is a dark ridge above the Nile Valley, its limestone fields empty except for wind-moving dust across broken stone. Then the light rises, revealing a wound cut into the summit, a deep descending trench, ragged walls, blocks scattered along the bedrock, and fragments of reddish granite catching the first warmth of the sun. Nothing here resembles the complete geometry of Giza. There is no shining peak, no continuous face, no chamber sealed behind an intact entrance. The monument appears to have been opened from above and emptied until its skeleton became part of the hill. Yet this ruin marks the chosen burial place of a king, Djedefre, son and successor of Khufu, and once occupied Egypt's highest pyramid site. Its disappearance is the first illusion of Abu Rawash. The pyramid was not hidden when it was built. It was designed to command the horizon. The ridge lies northwest of Giza, separate from the plateau and high above the surrounding country. From this height, the builders could look east toward the cultivated valley and north toward the broad approach to the delta. In Djedefre's age, the river landscape differed from today's. Channels shifted, floodplains changed, and areas now buried beneath sand may have held waterways, settlements, landing places, and roads. Research on buried Nile branches makes that vanished geography easier to imagine, although no study has identified Djedefre's harbour with certainty. What survives on the ridge suggests that his complex was tied to a much larger ceremonial route. A causeway extended for roughly 1.5 kilometers toward the north, ending in an area whose ancient structures remain incompletely known. The pyramid therefore belonged to a connected landscape, not to an isolated patch of desert. Its modern nickname, the Fourth Pyramid, has preserved interest while encouraging confusion. It sounds as though a forbidden monument stands beyond Giza's 3 great pyramids, perhaps sealed by authorities or excluded from official history. Abu Rawash tells a less sensational and more compelling story. This is not the 4th pyramid of the Giza Plateau, and there is no archaeological evidence that it contains an intact secret chamber, unknown technology, or a mysterious category of stone. Archaeologists have entered its excavated passages and cleared enormous quantities of debris from the subterranean construction. The difficulty is not that no one can enter. The difficulty is that later stone removal destroyed so much of what there was to enter. Public access may be limited because the place is a vulnerable archaeological landscape, but restricted tourism is not evidence of concealment. Standing at the Great Trench makes that distinction unavoidable. The interior does not wait behind a closed door. It lies exposed as an architectural negative. Workers in Djedefre's reign cut into the bedrock before constructing the descending route and chambers within a deep T-shaped excavation. Later dismantlers removed much of the masonry that completed those spaces. The hollow can look unfinished, as if a royal project had been abandoned at the beginning. For generations, that appearance encouraged a simple conclusion: Djedefre ruled briefly, failed to complete his pyramid, and left a scar in the hill. Excavations have complicated that interpretation. Evidence from the wider complex, including cult activity, storage areas, occupation, architectural elements, and later quarrying, points strongly toward a monument that was completed or came close to completion. Some official and popular accounts retain the older description of an unfinished pyramid, so scholars must speak carefully. The evidence remains incomplete, but a ruin stripped after construction can easily masquerade as a building never finished. The missing mass is especially deceptive because Djedefre's architects used the ridge itself as part of their design. Beneath the vanished masonry stands a natural mound of rock, incorporated into the body of the pyramid. Modern estimates suggest that this core of bedrock replaced roughly 44 or 45% of the volume that otherwise would have required quarried blocks. This was not a crude shortcut. It was an intelligent use of topography, reducing labour while allowing a substantial monument to rise from an already commanding summit. The base measured about 106 metres on each side, with a projected height near 67 metres. Those dimensions made it closer in scale to Menkaur's later pyramid than to Khufu's Great Pyramid. But raw height above the foundation is only part of what an observer sees. Raised on Abu Rawash, Djedefre's pyramid may have held a remarkably prominent position against the western sky. Its colour would also have changed with distance and daylight. Local limestone formed much of the construction, while pink or red granite from Aswan was used for lower casing and important architectural elements. Recent work indicates that granite casing may have risen to at least the 8th course. Above it, pale limestone surfaces would have reflected the sun, creating a contrast between the grounded red lower zone and the brighter ascending form. The exact final appearance cannot be reconstructed in every detail, and no single explanation fully accounts for every displaced block. Still, what survives is enough to replace the image of a dull, unfinished heap with that of a carefully calculated royal landmark. Even the natural hill, invisible beneath its finished faces, became part of an illusion of human mastery. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. If this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy, Abu Rawash rewards patience because almost every dramatic claim about it contains a smaller truth turned in the wrong direction. The site is difficult to visit, but not forbidden by some ancient secret. The pyramid is ruined, but probably not because Djedefre's immediate successors erased it. Its chambers are devastated, but their destruction reveals centuries of quarrying rather than a single act of vengeance. Its stones may have travelled far, perhaps even to later monuments, though the newest suggestions still await proof, and while the pyramid itself has almost vanished, the ridge preserves the logic of its placement. From below, in the ancient floodplain, the summit would have announced royal presence over an immense distance. That is the first way to enter Djedefre's world, not by imagining a sealed door, but by restoring a missing silhouette. The broken trench becomes an interior once roofed in stone. The bedrock mound disappears beneath measured courses. Granite catches the low sun, pale casing rises above it, and the causeway draws a ceremonial line toward waterways now lost beneath cultivation and sand. On the highest pyramid site in Egypt, a monument stands where modern eyes see absence. Its king did not choose invisibility. Time, reuse, and misunderstanding created that impression. To learn why Djedefre raised his pyramid here, one must first recognize how completely the ruin has reversed the original message. What now seems hidden was once meant to be seen. The silhouette restored above Abu Rawash belonged to a king who stands between names far more familiar than his own. Behind Djedefre rises Khufu, builder of the Great Pyramid. After him comes Khafre, whose pyramid and valley temples dominate the central plateau at Giza. Djedefre occupies the narrow space between those monumental reigns, and the condition of his burial place has often made his kingship seem broken. Yet royal succession in the Old Kingdom was not recorded as a clear family narrative. It survives through inscriptions, titles, tombs, statue fragments, later king lists, and objects displaced from their original settings. Djedefre was a son of Khufu, although the identity of his mother remains uncertain. Modern books use Djedefre, while older works often call him Djedefre. reflecting different arrangements of the same royal name. That did not mean he inherited a court in which every place was settled. Khufu had several sons and daughters, born to different royal women, and seniority alone may not have determined who received the throne. A prince could die before his father. A marriage could join different branches of the family. A new king also needed recognition from officials, priests, workforces, and provincial elites whose careers might span several reigns. One figure haunts every reconstruction of this transition, Prince Kawab. He was a prominent son of Khufu and was buried in a large mastaba near the Great Pyramid. Earlier Egyptologists often treated him as the crown prince who should have succeeded, then imagined that Djedefre removed him. The theory grew partly from Kawab's status and partly from Djedefre's marriage to Hetepheres II, who had also been Kawab's wife. In a modern retelling, those details almost write a palace crime by themselves, but no contemporary inscription accuses Djedefre of murder, usurpation, or rebellion. Kawab may simply have died during Khufu's lifetime. Royal remarriage could preserve property, rank, ritual roles, or alliances within the dynasty without implying violence. Scholars still debate the precise connections, but the murder story says more than the evidence permits. Hetepheres II is crucial because her long life seems to cross several royal generations. She was a daughter of Khufu, a wife of Kawab, and later probably a wife of Djedefre. Her changing position reveals a court adapting after a death, not necessarily collapsing in conflict. Her monuments and titles are fragmentary, so the sequence cannot be reconstructed perfectly. Still, her association with Djedefre weakens the image of a king excluded from Khufu's family. Djedefre's children and relatives also appear around Abu Rawash through statue fragments, inscriptions, and nearby burials. Names such as Setka emerge from the debris, although identifying every mother, rank, and succession prospect remains difficult. There is another clue near Khufu's pyramid itself. Marks associated with Djedefre were found in connection with one of the boat pits beside his father's monument. Their exact implications must be handled cautiously, but they fit the possibility that Djedefre supervised elements of Khufu's burial arrangements or completed work after the older king's death. Such responsibility would have been an act of legitimate succession. A usurper could also appropriate a predecessor's funeral, yet nothing here requires that explanation. What survives suggests continuity. The son assumes royal authority, attends to his father's mortuary landscape, and begins a complex of his own. The distance between Giza and Abu Rawash becomes suspicious only if one assumes that every loyal successor had to build beside Khufu. The duration of Djedefre's reign is less certain than the basic order of kings. Later records are damaged, abbreviated, or composed long after the Fourth Dynasty. Estimates often favour a relatively short reign, while disputed workmen's marks and counting dates have encouraged arguments for a longer one. Egyptian years could be identified by cattle counts used for taxation, but their frequency cannot always be converted neatly into modern chronology. A high count does not automatically settle how long a king ruled when the reading or attribution is contested. It is safer to say that Djedefre ruled in the middle of the 26th century BCE and that the exact length remains unresolved. Short reigns are tempting explanations for ruined monuments, but they can become circular. The pyramid looks incomplete, so the king must have ruled briefly. The king supposedly ruled briefly, so the pyramid must have remained incomplete. Archaeology at Abu Rawash disrupts that loop. A developed mortuary complex, sustained cult activity, substantial architectural investment, and signs of later dismantling cannot give an exact regnal total. but they show a site with a life extending beyond an abandoned foundation. Djedefre's name also continued in Egyptian memory. It appears in later royal traditions, and his mortuary cult survived into subsequent dynasties. A ruler deliberately erased after death should be harder to find in precisely those contexts. Khafre eventually followed within the same dynastic world, though the sequence around individual reigns has generated proposals involving poorly known rulers. Later traditions and damaged king lists introduce names that cannot always be matched securely to contemporary monuments. Uncertainty has sometimes been converted into a dramatic feud, Khufu's sons competing, Djedefre seizing power, Khafre returning to Giza, and Abu Rawash being condemned. It is satisfying because 3 pyramid sites become characters in a family struggle. The trouble is that architecture does not function as a courtroom confession. A new location could express theology, visibility, access to resources, connection with older sacred landscapes, or a practical response to terrain. Several motives could operate at once. Djedefre nevertheless inherited an extraordinary burden. Khufu had transformed the Western Bank with a monument whose scale could not easily be repeated. Any successor building nearby would be measured against it, while one building elsewhere could be interpreted as rejecting it. Djedefre chose a third path, a smaller pyramid on a higher ridge, using natural rock to magnify position rather than trying to exceed his father's mass. His royal titulary also sharpened the association between kingship and Ra, a development that would become increasingly important, though its full meaning belongs deeper in the story. Even here, his choices look less like retreat than a deliberate reformulation of royal presence. Seen between Khufu and Khafre, Djedefre is not an interloper occupying an empty line. He is the bridge through which the dynasty adjusts after the Great Pyramid. He participates in his father's funerary world, maintains a royal family, commissions sculpture and ritual architecture, and establishes a new horizon at Abu Rawash. Missing evidence prevents certainty about every marriage, death, and year of rule. It does not justify filling those spaces with assassination and revenge. Once the imagined scandal is removed, the central question changes. Djedefre no longer needs to be explained as the son driven away from Giza. Instead, the ridge demands an answer. Why would a legitimate successor, with the Great Pyramid behind him, deliberately carry the royal project north? The question left hanging over the dynasty begins as a journey. Djedefre's builders moved roughly 8 kilometers north of Khufu's pyramid toward the limestone ridge at Abu Rawash. Symbolically, this can feel like a departure from the center of the royal world. That feeling has encouraged the language of exile, a rejected son, a disputed succession, and a monument placed outside the family line seem to form one coherent drama. But coherence is not evidence. To understand the choice, we must forget the modern map on which Giza is famous and Abu Rawash is peripheral. In the 26th century BCE, neither place existed as a finished museum landscape. Both occupied a living edge of cultivation, waterways, desert roads, quarries, settlements, and older burials. Abu Rawash was not an empty hill discovered by Djedefre. The surrounding area had been used before his reign, and older burials made it part of an established funerary landscape. Building there could therefore claim continuity as easily as it could announce change. Egyptian kings did not select pyramid sites by following a single rule. Terrain, access, religious associations, available stone, labor organization, and the desire to distinguish one reign from another could all matter. Even within one dynasty, royal monuments did not need to stand shoulder to shoulder. The assumption that Djedefre should have remained beside Khufu comes from looking backward. After Khafra and Menkor turned Giza into a sequence, when Djedefre made his decision, that famous sequence did not yet exist. The ridge offered one advantage no observer could miss: height. Abu Rawash is the most elevated known pyramid site in Egypt, and the natural rise multiplied the apparent presence of a monument smaller than Khufu's. Djedefre did not have to defeat the Great Pyramid in a contest of masonry. By placing a pyramid with a base of about 106 meters on a commanding summit, he could create a different kind of dominance. From parts of the Nile Valley and Delta approach, its pale upper casing may have appeared suspended above the western desert, while its reddish granite base anchored it to the ridge. The intention was clearly not concealment. A monument built here spoke through elevation. The natural mound within the pyramid added a practical reason. By incorporating bedrock into the core, architects replaced close to 45% of the volume that would otherwise have required cut, transported, and set blocks. That saving did not make the task easy. The hill had to be surveyed, shaped, enclosed within precise faces, and connected to an ambitious system of chambers, temples, walls, and roads. Granite still had to travel from Aswan, hundreds of kilometers to the south. Skilled teams had to cut the deep foundation trench and coordinate materials arriving from different sources. Yet the ridge allowed royal planners to convert geology into architecture. What appears from the outside as a complete human-made mountain could conceal a carefully exploited natural one. Access remains harder to reconstruct because the ancient river has moved away from the world the builders knew. The Nile was never a fixed blue line. Its channels migrated across the floodplain, filling, narrowing, and disappearing as sediment accumulated. The buried Aramat branch warns against judging ancient logistics from today's dry terrain. No harbour belonging to Djedefre has been securely identified, and the valley end of his complex remains insufficiently explored. Still, the long causeway running roughly 1.5 kilometers northward indicates a ceremonial and transport connection toward a lower landscape. Structures may survive beneath sand and later deposits, but absence at the surface cannot define what stood there. The causeway's northern direction is itself unusual enough to invite interpretation. At Giza, modern visitors expect a pyramid causeway to descend generally toward the Nile in the east. Djedefre's route followed the opportunities and constraints of his own site. It may have sought favourable terrain, access to an ancient channel, a harbour zone, or a meaningful orientation within a wider sacred landscape. These possibilities do not exclude one another. What cannot be justified is turning the road into evidence that the king was fleeing his family. A causeway is a practical path and a ritual axis. It carried stone and supplies during construction, then priests, offerings, images, and royal memory after the king's death. Religion may have added another layer. Djedefre's name and titulary are closely associated with Ra, and he is connected with the early royal use of the title Son of Ra. No direct line of intention can be drawn from every wall to Heliopolis. Nevertheless, a high northern ridge exposed to sunrise and overlooking routes toward the delta suited an increasingly solar expression of kingship. Each morning the monument would receive light before lower ground, and each evening its western silhouette would merge with the realm of the dead. This measured interpretation helps explain why physical height could carry theological force. The king was not merely buried above the valley, his monument participated in the daily movement of light. There may also have been a political advantage in establishing a new royal centre. A pyramid complex was more than a tomb. It generated estates, offices, priesthoods, workshops, storehouses, residences, food, and materials. Abu Rawash allowed Djedefre to inscribe his reign onto a landscape not overwhelmed by his father's monument. Officials and royal relatives buried nearby could gather around his cult, forming a community whose traces survive in Cemetery F and elsewhere. Kingship could honour Khufu's burial while founding a distinct institution for his successor. None of these motives can be ranked with certainty. Djedefre left no surviving proclamation saying that he chose Abu Rawash for its height, its bedrock, its solar horizon, or its approach routes. Archaeology supplies constraints and probabilities rather than a private thought. The most responsible answer is therefore layered. The ridge offered visual power, an economical natural core, access to local limestone, connection to an older funerary zone, and the possibility of a new ritual landscape. Changing Nile channels may have made the location far more accessible than it now appears. Religious and dynastic ambitions could then transform those practical benefits into royal meaning. By the time the decision was made, surveyors had to turn possibility into measured ground. They marked a square around an irregular hill, determined an angle capable of producing the desired height, and planned chambers where solid bedrock stood in the way. The site that later observers treated as proof of Djedefre's isolation begins to look like a calculated answer to Khufu's legacy. He did not abandon monumentality. He chose to make the earth itself carry part of its weight. And once that choice was fixed, the most difficult work at Abu Rawash was no longer deciding where the pyramid should stand. It was persuading a natural ridge to behave like a royal machine. Persuading the ridge to behave like a royal machine began with lines drawn across uneven stone. Surveyors had to impose a square pyramid on a natural mound whose shape was irregular. They established the monument's sides, checked orientation, calculated the slope, and determined where the artificial courses would meet the living rock. The precision is obscured because later quarrymen removed the smooth surfaces. What remains looks irregular precisely because the regular shell is gone. Djedefre's architects were not placing a pyramid upon the hill. They were enclosing part of the hill inside a measured form. That decision required extraordinary control. A natural core could save much masonry, but it also created problems of its own. High places had to be cut down, low places filled, and each new course adjusted until the exterior planes rose at a consistent angle. The bedrock could not be moved aside for a passage. Routes into the pyramid therefore had to be planned together with a deep excavation in the summit. At Abu Rawash, the builders cut an immense trench with a T-shaped plan, opening the future interior to the sky before constructing its masonry spaces. The exposed scar seen today is the fossil of that process. Imagine the ridge during this first stage. Teams strike limestone with stone pounders and copper tools, loosening fragments that other workers carry away in baskets. Survey chords stretch between fixed points. Foremen compare levels, while scribes account for labour, rations, tools, and deliveries. Dust settles inside a cut that grows deeper with every season. There is no dark tunnel yet, because the passage and chambers are being formed in the open. Once walls, floors, and roofing elements were installed, the surrounding masonry could close over them. The pyramid would then hide the method by which its interior had been made. This is one reason the ruin is so misleading. At Giza, an intact mass still surrounds passages, allowing a visitor to experience movement from an entrance into darkness. At Abu Rawash, destruction has reversed that relationship. Most of the mass has vanished, and the substructure has become an open quarry. The modern eye sees foundations and assumes the builders never advance beyond them. But an open trench after dismantling can resemble an open trench before construction. Separating those moments requires pottery, tool traces, architectural fragments, cult remains, and the chronology of a later activity across the site. The descending corridor approached the chamber system from the north, following a pattern recognizable within royal pyramid architecture while adapting it to the local rock. The T-shaped excavation provided space for the rooms and connecting elements for the royal burial. Their exact original appearance is difficult to restore because later workers removed not only accessible facing stone but much of the chamber masonry itself. Even the burial room was almost completely dismantled. Archaeologists clearing the hollow in modern times needed lifting equipment to handle accumulated debris. They were not opening an untouched tomb. They were investigating the remains of an interior harvested as building material. Fragments nevertheless preserve clues. Pieces attributed to a stone sarcophagus indicate a form unusual enough to raise questions about the final burial arrangement. Granite and fine limestone belong to a hierarchy of materials in which location mattered tougher. Costly stone protected or emphasized critical zones, while local limestone supplied much of the monument's volume. Pink granite arriving from Aswan had travelled far by river before being hauled up the ridge. Its presence does not point to a lost substance or impossible technology. It points to a state organising quarrying, transport, seasonal labour, skilled finishing and precise placement across hundreds of kilometres. The climb from the floodplain was the chain's final stage. Blocks unloaded near the lower approach had to move along prepared routes toward a summit construction yard. Ramps, sledges, ropes, lubrication, levers, and coordinated teams are supported by broader Egyptian evidence. Although the exact ramp arrangement used at Djedefre's pyramid has not survived, we should resist replacing one fantasy with another by pretending to know the entire procedure. The surviving ridge tells us what had to be achieved, not every step by which it was achieved. Methods could change as the pyramid rose and working space narrowed. Around the main pyramid, construction expanded into a complex beyond the geometric body. Enclosure walls defined restricted zones. Large gateways controlled movement, while temples, storerooms, residences, workshops, boat-shaped features, and a satellite pyramid served practical and ceremonial needs. Excavation has identified 9 monumental gates within the enclosure system, an unusual arrangement still debated. These openings were not evidence that the monument lacked security. A royal mortuary complex had to admit priests, offerings, personnel, and processions while translating movement into ritual order. The workers who created that order were not an anonymous crowd living permanently on the pyramid face. Specialists arrived for different tasks, quarrying local stone, receiving granite, shaping blocks, preparing mortar, hauling loads, cutting architectural details, managing food, or recording supplies. Storage and habitation areas at Abu Rawash show that people ate, slept, repaired equipment, and maintained routines beside the king's sacred project. Pottery is especially valuable because broken vessels remained after grand surfaces disappeared. Jars, bowls, and imported containers reveal a site supplied and occupied through several phases, not one unfinished season. Construction anticipated the monument's second life. After burial, the complex would require estates and personnel to sustain offerings to Djedefre's spirit. Rooms that stored equipment during building could acquire new functions. Paths used by work gangs could become ceremonial approaches. The architecture was designed for a transition from intense construction to repeated cult activity. Continued worship after Djedefre's death matters. It implies that the complex operated as intended for priests and visitors to recognize a functioning royal memorial. The engineering secret of Abu Rawash is ultimately visible in this sequence. Surveyors captured an irregular hill inside a regular pyramid. Excavators opened the bedrock to build chambers from above. Transport networks brought granite from southern Egypt and supplies from the valley. Masons joined natural and artificial cores beneath casing whose alignment concealed their boundary. Then temples, walls, gates, stores, and roads turned the mass into an institution. No single miraculous device explains it. The wonder lies in coordination, thousands of ordinary decisions made accurately enough that geology, labor, ritual, and royal ambition became one structure. When the last casing courses sealed the natural mound from view, almost no observer could have guessed how much of the monument was already ancient rock, nor could anyone have foreseen that future quarrymen would undo the process. Opening the chambers, carrying away the walls, and leaving the hidden hill exposed again. To reconstruct what happened inside that finished form, we must now descend through the missing architecture and ask what the chambers were meant to contain before stone robbers transformed a royal interior into an empty cut beneath the sky. To descend through Abu Rawash's missing architecture, we must begin at an entrance that no longer behaves like an entrance. On the north side, a passage once carried movement downward beneath the body of the pyramid. Today, destruction has opened the construction from above, exposing the root and the great foundation cutting to daylight. The experience is therefore inverted. Instead of leaving the sun behind and moving through an intact stone mass, the visitor looks into a hollow where walls, ceilings, and much of the chamber system have been removed. It is less like entering a tomb than standing inside the outline of one. During construction, however, the interior would have been a controlled sequence. The descending's approach led towards spaces created within the deep T-shaped trench. Masons lined and completed those spaces before the rising core enclosed them. Once the roof and surrounding courses were in place, the open excavation disappeared beneath the pyramid. Darkness, weight, and restriction were deliberate. The king's burial was not meant to remain visible from the ridge. The exterior proclaimed royal presence to the landscape, while the interior withdrew the royal body from human access. Reconstructing the rooms is difficult because later quarrying reached beyond the casing and core. Valuable blocks were taken from the passage and chamber walls, and the burial chamber was almost entirely dismantled. Plans drawn from surviving bedrock record the negative shape of the complex, but every missing surface creates uncertainty. A socket may reveal where a block rested without preserving the block itself. A fragment may identify a material without proving the full height of a wall. The archaeology can recover dimensions and building stages more securely than it can restore the atmosphere of the finished rooms. Among the most intriguing remains are fragments associated with Djedefre's stone sarcophagus. Their form has encouraged discussion because the reconstructed container may differ from royal sarcophagi of the period. Yet this evidence is too incomplete to support stories about technology or an object removed by officials. A sarcophagus was a practical and ritual protection for the body. Placed at the deepest point of a system intended to endure, at Abu Rawash, even that massive object was broken. Its fragments tell us that a royal burial installation was planned, but they do not reveal whether Djedefre's mummy was finally laid inside it. That question remains one of the site's genuine mysteries. No securely identified body of Djedefre has been recovered, and no intact burial assemblage survives. It is therefore possible to imagine that the king died before the chambers were ready, that he was buried elsewhere, that he entered this pyramid and was later removed, or that robbers destroyed every recognizable trace. None of these possibilities can be demonstrated. The absence of the king's remains is not exceptional enough to choose among them. Most Old Kingdom royal burials were robbed, disturbed, or dismantled so thoroughly that the occupant can no longer be identified. The important distinction is between a missing burial and an unused monument. Archaeology across the complex suggests that Abu Rawash became more than a construction site. Temples, offering places, storage areas, royal sculpture, and mortuary activity show that Djedefre's memory was installed here after his death. A cult could operate around a cenotaph, so ritual activity alone cannot prove that his body lay below. But it makes the image of a casually abandoned project less convincing. Egyptians treated the complex as the king's funerary institution, even if modern excavators cannot recover the moment of interment. We should also resist expecting the chambers to explain themselves through sacred texts. The pyramid text known from later Old Kingdom monuments had not yet appeared on the walls of royal pyramids in Djedefre's time. His interior was probably not covered with the spells that make the Pyramid of Unas, built much later, seem almost like a stone manuscript. Meaning was carried through architecture, orientation, burial equipment, ritual performance, and the relationship between the chamber and the structures above. Bare walls would not have meant an empty theology. For the people who prepared the burial, descent transformed the king's condition. The passage crossed from the visible world into a protected realm beneath a man-made horizon. Offerings and ceremonies performed in the temples sustained a connection with a body that was meant to remain inaccessible. The pyramid's mass did not merely prevent intrusion, it converted isolation into permanence. Even if Djedefre's mummy never reached the chamber, the architecture was designed around that expectation, the dead king enclosed below, his cult active outside, and his monument aligned with cycles larger than one reign. Robbery broke that separation long before modern archaeology arrived. The exact date of the first intrusion is unknown. Valuable grave goods would have attracted thieves, while later builders valued the monument itself as a quarry. Those were different kinds of destruction. Tomb robbers sought portable wealth and may have damaged doors, burial equipment, and a body. Quarrymen pursued casing, wall blocks, granite, and reusable stone, enlarging openings and erasing entire rooms. Centuries of activity could overlap until the original crime became impossible to isolate. Abu Rawash does not preserve one dramatic night of violation. It preserves the accumulated result of repeated extraction. This also explains why the phrase "no one enters" misrepresents the site. There is no sealed chamber protected from every explorer. Archaeologists have worked within the excavated substructure, removing enormous deposits of rubble with heavy lifting equipment and documenting the surviving cuts. What may be difficult is ordinary tourist access, which depends on conservation, administration, and local conditions. A place can be closed or irregularly accessible without containing a forbidden interior. At Djedefre's pyramid, the cruel irony is that the interior is unusually exposed because so little of it remains. Seen from the bottom of the trench, the mystery changes scale. The question is not what secret waits behind an unopened door, but how much information can survive after the door, corridor, ceiling, burial chamber, sarcophagus, and royal body have all been attacked or removed. Every tool mark and fragment becomes a witness. Together they support a real chamber system and a royal funerary purpose, yet stop short of confirming an actual burial. That limit should not weaken the story. It reveals how archaeology works when absence is the principal evidence. We can now climb back toward the surface, where Djedefre's presence becomes easier to trace. Around the empty chambers stood temples, gates, storerooms, a satellite pyramid, boat-shaped installations, and images of the royal family. These remains do not return the missing king to his sarcophagus, but they show the institution built around his afterlife. If the hollow below preserves the silence of a vanished burial, the buildings above preserve activity offerings delivered, doors crossed, vessels broken, statues installed, and generations of people continuing to speak Djedefre's name. The buildings above the emptied chamber reveal a different kind of survival. A pyramid could lose its interior, yet the institution around it might continue through rooms, offerings, and repeated journeys. At Abu Rawash, Djedefre's afterlife was not confined beneath the missing stone mass. It occupied a ceremonial world in which priests crossed thresholds, food entered storerooms, statues received ritual attention, and royal relatives remained close to the king. The remains are fragmentary, but active. They show that the site was used, supplied, and remembered after construction ended. The mortuary temple stood against the pyramid's eastern side, where ritual connected the hidden burial with ceremonies performed by the living. Its plan is difficult to read because later quarrying disturbed walls and floors, but excavation identified spaces for reception, storage, purification, and offerings. This was not simply a chapel attached to a giant tomb. It was the operational center of a royal cult. Bread, beer, meat, incense, oils, textiles, and other goods could arrive from estates assigned to support Djedefre's memory. Priests transformed those materials into ritual service, then redistributed much of their value among personnel. Storage rooms preserve an unglamorous truth about eternity. It required administration. Jars had to be filled, sealed, carried, opened, and replaced. Grain had to be processed, animals acquired, linen supplied, and staff organized. Records from Abu Rawash are incomplete, but the architecture and pottery fit the wider Old Kingdom system in which a dead king's cult depended on land, labor, and officials. Every offering before a royal image rested upon people working beyond the sacred enclosure. The promise that Djedefre would receive nourishment forever was also a promise that an economic network would endure. In this sense, the cult converted farms and workshops across the valley into distant parts of the pyramid. Movement through the enclosure was unusually elaborate. Excavators have identified 9 monumental gateways into the surrounding wall, a feature that distinguishes Abu Rawash from the simpler picture imagined for a pyramid precinct. Their precise functions remain debated. Some may have directed processions, separated service areas, or linked different building phases. Whatever their purposes, the gates show that access was organized rather than absent. The complex was not a featureless barricade around one sealed object. It controlled entry, allowing supplies, priests, officials, and ritual participants to pass while preserving boundaries around the king. Near the pyramid, boat-shaped installations added another layer of meaning. Royal monuments could include pits associated with vessels, whether actual boats were deposited or the forms served symbolic purposes. Khufu's great boats make it tempting to imagine identical burials everywhere, but Abu Rawash does not permit that certainty. The surviving features are damaged and their contents lost or unclear. They may have connected Djedefre with divine travel, royal procession, and the solar cycle in which a vessel carried the sun across the sky. A boat beside a pyramid could join the memory of Nile transport to a cosmic voyage available through ritual. South of the main pyramid stood a smaller satellite pyramid whose history resists a single label. Such structures are often called cult pyramids because they could support the royal funerary program without serving as ordinary tombs. At Abu Rawash, pottery, architectural changes, and burial evidence suggest that the building was adapted for a queen. Her identity remains uncertain. This ambiguity reveals monuments changing during construction or use. A planned royal landscape was not frozen when surveyors first marked it. Deaths, marriages, political needs, and ritual decisions could alter its functions. The satellite pyramid prevents Djedefre's complex from appearing solitary. A royal burial drew other dynasty members into its physical and ceremonial orbit. Nearby Cemetery F contained mastabas connected with princes, officials, and courtiers. Their tombs did not merely seek protection beside royal power. They created a community of the dead whose careers and afterlives remained ordered around the king. Precise identities and relationships was not always secure, yet the cemetery demonstrates that Abu Rawash developed as a planned elite necropolis, rather than a rejected building ground briefly occupied and forgotten. Royal sculpture made that community visible. Excavators recovered broken images of Djedefre and his family, including heads, torsos, bases, inscriptions, and fine stone fragments. Some had been violently reduced, and early interpretations treated their destruction as proof that Khafre or another enemy attacked Djedefre's memory. Later evidence changed the chronology. Amphorae, imported pottery, quarry tools, and activity from Greek and Roman times show that much breaking and extraction occurred more than 2,000 years after the Fourth Dynasty. A smashed statue does not date its own destruction. When complete, those statues place the king in ideal forms. One celebrated Louvre head, carved from quartzite or silicified sandstone and retaining red colour, may have belonged to a royal sphinx. Other fragments show the ruler wearing symbols of kingship and participating in the language of divine authority. These were not modern portraits intended only to record an individual face. They created durable bodies through which presence, offerings, and royal identity could continue. Breaking them damaged that function, but surviving pieces still speak Djedefre's name and appearance. The cult's duration strongly answers the legend of immediate erasure. Djedefre remained recognized in king lists and funerary traditions, while his mortuary service survived into the later Old Kingdom. Institutions could decline, lose funding, or be reorganized as dynasties changed, but continued ritual attention is difficult to reconcile with a successor determined to eliminate every trace of him. Khafre's return to Giza did not require Abu Rawash's destruction. Egyptian royal memory could accommodate different pyramid sites within one family history. Memory survived not as an abstract idea, but as work repeated by named generations of servants. The complex did not remain unchanged for centuries. Mud brick deteriorated, roofs failed, supplies diminished, rooms were reused, and people returned with purposes different from those of Djedefre's priests. A sacred precinct can become a settlement, workshop, quarry, or source of ready-cut stone without one dramatic break between reverence and destruction. At Abu Rawash, later occupation left pottery and industrial remains among royal debris. Such modest finds date activities that monumental fragments cannot. They turn a vague story of ancient hatred into a long history of practical reuse. The surface complex offers what the burial chamber could not evidence of a functioning afterlife. It cannot prove Djedefre's body lay beneath the pyramid, identify the queen in the southern monument, or explain every gate. But it shows offerings moving through storerooms, personnel crossing entrances, royal images standing in ritual spaces, boats evoking journeys, and elite tombs gathering around the king. Abu Rawash was not only built, it was inhabited by ceremony. To understand its ruler, we must look beyond architecture to the language he placed around kingship, the title that bound him more explicitly to Ra, and turned the high ridge into a stage for the sun. The title Son of Ra brings us to the most luminous part of Djedefre's kingship, but also to one of the easiest places to overinterpret Abu Rawash. Djedefre is commonly identified as the first Egyptian king to incorporate this title into the royal titulary. That innovation did not mean that worship of the sun began with him, or that earlier kings had no relationship with Ra. Solar belief had deep roots. What changed under Djedefre was the language through which the living king defined himself, not merely protected by a deity, but presented as the sun god's son. Djedefre's name itself contains Ra. It can be rendered along the lines of Ra is enduring, although translations of Egyptian names often vary in English. The name repeatedly joined the king's identity to the solar god. This was not a private statement of belief. A royal name helped organize how the state imagined authority. If the king was the son of Ra, his rule belonged within a divine family, and his monument could express that relationship in stone, landscape, and daily light. The ridge at Abu Rawash makes the connection irresistible. Its summit rises above the valley, open to the eastern dawn and western sunset. A pyramid there would catch light across a broad horizon, appearing elevated even when compared with larger monuments built on lower ground. It is reasonable to ask whether this solar theatre influenced Djedefre's choice, yet no surviving inscription says that he selected the ridge because it was closer to Ra, and elevation alone cannot prove theological intention. The same height offered practical visibility. Sacred meaning and physical advantage need not be separated, but neither should one be mistaken for direct evidence of the other. To ancient observers, a pyramid was already bound to ideas of ascent and transformed kingship. Its sloping sides could evoke the sun's rays, the primeval mound emerging from the waters, or a stairway toward the sky. Modern explanations often select one symbol and present it as the secret key to every pyramid. Egyptian religion was more layered. Images and structures could sustain several meanings at once, and those meanings evolved. Djedefre's monument participated in older royal traditions while emphasizing a solar vocabulary that later rulers would make increasingly explicit. That later development is important. During the Fifth Dynasty, kings built solar temples and gave the cult of Ra a more visible place in royal institutions. Looking backward, Djedefre can appear to announce that future, but history rarely turns through a single invention. His Son of Ra title is better understood as a significant stage in a longer transformation, not the moment when Egypt suddenly abandoned one theology for another. Horus, the sky, ancestors, local gods, and funerary powers continued to define kingship. Ra was added to that system. The king's position within that system changed at death. While alive, he performed the role of divine son and mediator, sustaining order between gods, people, and the land. After death, he joined a realm of celestial and ancestral power, while his successor assumed the living office. The mortuary cult at Abu Rawash managed this transition. Priests served Djedefre through offerings and images, maintaining a presence that could receive food, incense, speech, and remembrance Each sunrise renewed a cosmic order in which the deceased king still had a place, even though another ruler now governed Egypt. The royal statues found in the complex made this theology visible at human scale. Djedefre could appear enthroned, crowned, or joined to the form of a sphinx, combining the ruler's face with the lion's body. The famous reddish head now in the Louvre may have belonged to such a royal sphinx, although its original statue is incomplete. Traces of red pigment intensified the living quality of the stone. Here again, colour mattered symbolically and materially. Red could evoke vitality, power, desert, danger, and sunlight, but its meaning depended on context. It should not be reduced to a code with one automatic translation. Nor should the Sphinx be turned into proof that Djedefre created the Great Sphinx at Giza in his father's image. Proposals linking him to that monument have received attention, especially because his complex produced early royal Sphinx sculpture. Yet the date, patron, and face of the Great Sphinx remain debated, and the evidence does not permit identifying it confidently as Khufu commissioned by Djedefre. Similar artistic language across the dynasty shows shared ideas of royal power, not necessarily a hidden portrait program. Abu Rawash contributes to the history of the Sphinx form without solving every question at Giza. The solar title has also attracted astronomical claims. From a high pyramid, it is tempting to draw lines toward Heliopolis, Giza, stars, solstice points, or imagined sacred geometries covering the landscape. Some alignments may reflect real orientation practices, since Egyptian builders observed cardinal directions and the sky with considerable skill. But a line placed between two monuments on a modern map is not automatically an ancient plan. To establish intention, scholars need accurate measurements, chronological relationships, repeated patterns, and supporting cultural evidence. Djedefre's bond with Ra is genuine enough that it does not require speculative geometry. What the evidence supports is already powerful. A king who followed the builder of the Great Pyramid chose Egypt's highest pyramid ridge, adopted a titulary more explicitly defining him as Ra's son, and filled his mortuary complex with images capable of sustaining divine kingship after death. The pale upper casing would have received the changing sun, while the reddish stone below gave weight and contrast to the monument. Priests worked within that illuminated architecture, turning solar language into daily ritual. Theology was therefore not an invisible idea added by modern observers. It was embedded in names, titles, materials, performance, and place. At the same time, the sun did not make the pyramid untouchable. Light that once revealed smooth casing later fell into an open trench. Titles survived in fragments while statues broke. Cult rooms decayed, and the monument became a quarry. This contrast is central to Abu Rawash. Djedefre sought endurance through Ra, yet endurance did not mean that every block would remain fixed forever. It meant that royal identity could persist even when the architecture changed beyond recognition. His name, containing the gods, outlived the polished surfaces meant to proclaim it. To restore those surfaces, we must now look closely at the substance of the vanished monument. The so-called forbidden stone of popular stories was not an unknown material. It was a calculated combination of local limestone, fine pale casing, and granite carried north from Aswan. Its colours, courses, and surviving fragments allow us to imagine how sunlight worked upon the completed pyramid. They also reveal why later quarrymen found Abu Rawash so valuable. The same stone that expressed the son of Ra became the reason much of his mountain disappeared. The stone that made Djedefre's pyramid visible also made it vulnerable. The monument did not present one uniform surface. Its body depended on local limestone and the natural ridge, while pale limestone and pink or red granite formed selected exterior and architectural elements. Sunlight separated these materials by color, texture, and reflection. This was not a mysterious substance unknown to archaeology, but familiar Egyptian stone used with purpose, common material for mass, finer stone for appearance, and granite for strength, prestige, and visual emphasis. Local limestone was the practical foundation. Quarried nearby, it reduced transport and allowed masons to build around the bedrock mound enclosed within the plan. Not every core block needed the finish of casing stone. Many could be shaped only as accurately as their position required, then levelled with mortar and neighbouring courses. Once the casing was installed, observers saw smooth plains rather than varied blocks and natural hill. The exterior concealed differences that destruction later exposed. Pale limestone on the upper faces caught the sun more strongly than the weathered ruin does today. Egyptian fine casing stone often came from quarries east of the Nile, including Tura, but Abu Rawash does not allow every displaced fragment to be assigned confidently to its source or course. What matters is the contrast. Above the darker ridge and reddish lower zone, a bright surface sharply defined the pyramid against the desert sky. At dawn and late afternoon, that transformation reinforced the solar language surrounding Djedefre. Granite created the monument's most distinctive weight. It came from the Aswan region, where quarry workers detached masses from bedrock, reduced them to transportable forms, and prepared them for a journey north. The stone is commonly called pink or red granite, though specialists classify Egyptian examples within a range of granitic rocks. Such distinctions help trace quarry sources but do not make the material unnatural. Its crystals and colour come from geology, not an artificial compound or vanished civilization. Transporting it was nevertheless extraordinary. Blocks moved from quarry to river, travelled hundreds of kilometres by vessel, were unloaded near the lower approach, then hauled toward the summit. The Nile carried the greatest distance but did not solve the final ascent. Sledges, ropes, prepared tracks, coordinated labour, and timing converted distant stone into architecture. Each block carried the work of quarrymen, boat crews, administrators, haulers, masons, and those who fed them. Older reconstructions placed granite mainly at the lowest exterior course and within important internal spaces. Recent investigation argues that the granite casing rose considerably higher, reaching at least the 8th course. Rather than a thin red border, Djedefre's pyramid may have possessed a substantial granite lower section, above which lighter limestone continued toward the summit. The arrangement of every face cannot be recovered and estimates remain open to revision. Still, surviving blocks and setting evidence support a bolder colour scheme than older images suggested. Joining these materials demanded precision because granite and limestone respond differently to cutting, pressure, and weather. Masons had to prepare level beds, control joints, and make the transition between the lower and upper casing appear intentional. The finished surface hid those adjustments beneath a continuous geometric plane. Even slight irregularities could multiply as courses rose, so measurements had to be checked repeatedly. The elegance visible from the valley depended upon corrections made by workers who could never stand far enough away to see the effect. Granite also appeared where resistance and ritual importance met. Passages, chamber features, thresholds, or burial equipment could receive harder stone because those locations carried pressure and symbolic value. Yet granite was not indestructible. Workers knew how to split it along prepared lines, pound its surface, saw or drill it with abrasives, and reuse finished pieces. Working an exposed block could be easier than extracting a new one at a swan. Once Abu Rawash lost protection, its costly material became an accessible reserve. This transformation happened gradually. A casing block first created a sacred face. After collapse or deliberate removal, it became building stone, perhaps recut for a threshold, column, pavement, wall, millstone, or decoration. Smaller fragments could be reduced further, while limestone might be burned for lime. Reuse did not require later people to believe Djedefre was evil or forgotten. They only had to value the stone more in a new building than in a damaged monument to a remote king. The causeway and high ridge complicated removal but did not prevent it. Construction paths could be adapted, and quarrying communities worked repeatedly rather than in one campaign. Pottery, tools, an occupation point especially to substantial activity during Greek and Roman times, followed by extraction in later centuries and into the 19th century. The monument did not disappear on a single night. Its loss was cumulative, each generation inheriting a smaller pyramid and a more convenient quarry. One recent proposal suggests that granite from Abu Rawash travelled to Alexandria and was reused in the Pharaoh lighthouse or its later building history. The idea gained attention in 2025 through comparisons of stone, transport possibilities, and Alexandria's demand for granite. It is worth investigating but has not been proved by geochemical matching of particular blocks. Similar Aswan granite was used widely across Egypt, so colour and resemblance cannot establish that a stone began in Djedefre's pyramid. The hypothesis remains a question, not a revelation. That caution makes the question more interesting. If petrographic or geochemical work links reused Alexandrian blocks to Abu Rawash, it would trace a remarkable second life stone quarried for a Fourth Dynasty king, becoming part of a Hellenistic monument 2 millennia later. If the link fails, research still clarifies Egypt's networks of stone supply and reuse. Either outcome is better than claiming every red block at Alexandria came from the vanished pyramid. Archaeology advances by turning resemblance into a testable provenance problem. The material story leaves two pyramids on the same ridge. One is Djedefre's finished monument, its red lower courses and pale upper faces transforming sunlight into royal presence. The other is the quarry that emerged after protection weakened, its blocks valued as resources. The first explains why the pyramid mattered, the second why so little remains. There is no need for forbidden stone, secret energy, or an order from Khafra to erase his brother. Evidence points toward ordinary limestone, prestigious granite, brilliant engineering, and a long history of removal. That history now becomes the central investigation. Broken statues once seemed to prove dynastic revenge. Ruined chambers looked like evidence of an abandoned reign. The return to Giza seemed to complete the accusation. But pottery and quarry debris moved much destruction far beyond the Fourth Dynasty. To understand who dismantled Abu Rawash and why the legend of Khafra's vengeance survived, we must follow its stones not through one family quarrel, but across nearly 4,000 years of reuse. The 4,000 years of reuse at Abu Rawash did not begin with a single order to destroy Djedefre. While the mortuary cult remained active, the pyramid stones belonged to a functioning royal institution. Priests and ritual memory protected stones that still served the king. As that institution weakened, the balance shifted. A casing stone no longer guarded by royal authority could become material for another doorway, pavement, wall, or furnace. The monument did not need to be officially condemned. It only needed to become less useful as a pyramid than as a quarry. Tomb robbery probably formed the earliest wound, although its date cannot be fixed. Robbers sought what burial ceremonies had concealed: metal, jewellery, vessels, precious stone, timber, and anything attached to the royal body. They could break a sarcophagus without removing thousands of tons from the exterior. Quarrying was different in purpose and scale. It attacked the architecture itself, selecting reusable limestone and granite, opening rooms, reducing walls, and eventually exposing the bedrock trench. The two processes overlapped, but they should not be compressed into one imagined night. This distinction matters because the ruin has often been treated as a photograph of Djedefre's reign. If the chambers are empty, perhaps the king was never buried. If the core is low, perhaps construction stopped. If statues are broken, perhaps a successor hated him. Each conclusion assumes that destruction occurred immediately after his death, yet the archaeological record places important episodes of dismantling much later. Pottery from Greek and Roman periods, imported amphorae, tools, settlement traces, and quarry debris reveal people living and working among the royal remains more than 2 millennia after Djedefre. By then, no Fourth Dynasty family quarrel was required to explain extraction. Quarry workers did not wander across the ridge collecting only loose pieces. They organized repeated campaigns, opened working areas, maintained tools, stored supplies, and reduced blocks for transport. Granite rewarded the effort because it was durable and costly to obtain fresh from Aswan. Existing architectural joints showed where stones could be separated. The pyramid was therefore a quarry already surveyed, elevated, and filled with blocks prepared by ancient masons. Its height, once an advantage for royal visibility, became an obstacle, but not an impossible one. Loads could descend along tracks related to the causeway or later roads, then enter regional transport networks. Work did not have to remove the monument quickly. A few blocks taken repeatedly over generations could erase courses whose construction had demanded enormous concentrated labour. Destruction wins an unfair contest against building it can follow joints, accept broken pieces, and stop whenever demand falls. What took a centralized state years to assemble could be dispersed by many smaller economies across centuries. Political change encouraged this dispersal. Persian, Ptolemaic, Roman, Byzantine, Islamic, and modern communities inherited different relationships with Old Kingdom monuments. Those labels do not identify a single continuous group of destroyers, and they should not be used to assign blame loosely. Some people visited ancient places, some worshipped nearby, some buried their dead, and others quarried stone. Sacred meaning could survive beside practical reuse. Egypt itself repeatedly incorporated older material into newer monuments, not because every earlier ruler was despised, but because worked stone was valuable. The broken statues require the same patience. Fragments of Djedefre and members of his family were found scattered through disturbed contexts. Their condition once seemed almost personal, as though enemies had attacked the king's face soon after his death. Deliberate damage may have occurred, but breaking also accompanied quarrying, lime production, the removal of valuable stone, and the collapse of buildings. A statue knocked from its setting in the Roman period could shatter as violently as one struck in the Fourth Dynasty. Without a secure context, Emotional intention cannot be dated from damage alone. The theory of Khafra's vengeance nevertheless became attractive because it connected several absences. Djedefre built away from Giza. His reign appeared short. Khafre returned to the plateau. Abu Rawash was ruined, and royal statues were broken. Arranged in that order, the clues resemble the aftermath of a dynastic struggle. Earlier scholars added the suspected murder of Prince Kawab and Djedefre's marriage to Hetefers, producing a complete tragedy from evidence that never states one. The story survived because it explained everything at once. Its weakness is that most of what it explains was created by assumptions or by damage occurring thousands of years later. A campaign of immediate erasure should have left other contradictions. Djedefre's name was not systematically cut from every surviving record. His place in royal memory continued, and his mortuary cult endured beyond his death. Family members were associated with his complex, while later Egyptians still recognized him as a king. Khafra could choose Giza for his pyramid without destroying his predecessor's legitimacy. Returning south may have reflected topography, access, symbolism, or a desire to place his own monument near Khufu. The pyramid's extreme loss is therefore evidence of opportunity more securely than hatred. Once casing removal exposed the core, weather and gravity assisted the quarrymen. Rubble accumulated in the substructure. Walls lost support. Blocks that had been difficult to reach became accessible from above. Each alteration made the next easier, until the monument crossed a threshold at which it looked less like a pyramid and more like a stone field around a natural mound. Later, observers then mistook the final stage for the original one. Extraction continued into comparatively recent times. 19th century accounts describe active removal of stone from the area, when the expanding needs of Cairo and surrounding settlements placed fresh value on ancient masonry. Reports of large daily camel loads have often been repeated, although exact numbers are difficult to verify and should not be treated as a measured total. The broader fact is secure modern visitors did not encounter a ruin left untouched since antiquity. They arrived while its material afterlife was still unfolding. By then, memory had detached from landscape. Giza's surviving masses defined what a pyramid should look like, while Abu Rawash seemed anomalous, unfinished, or punished. Early surveyors mapped the remains but worked before pottery sequences and modern excavation could separate building from dismantling. Was this a foundation abandoned by a usurper, a temple mistaken for a pyramid, or evidence of a form never completed? Answers changed as archaeologists recovered fragments that the quarry had failed to remove. The dismantling of Abu Rawash is thus not the closing scene of Djedefre's story. It is the process that wrote the modern mystery. Robbers emptied a burial. Quarrymen opened the structure. Later, economies scattered its stone, and scholarship initially compressed those changes into royal revenge. The next task is to watch that interpretation being undone from the first modern surveys and early excavations to the Franco-Swiss investigations that restored a pyramid where previous generations had seen only failure. Undoing that interpretation required more than one decisive object. Archaeologists had to separate the many lives of Abu Rawash layer by layer. The surface did not preserve one moment, but a palimpsest in which later removal often looked older than surviving construction. The first modern visitors found a ridge scarred by extraction, its passages filled with fallen blocks, its temples reduced to foundations, and its sculpture scattered through debris. Every excavation risked confusing Djedefre's builders with robbers, priests with quarrymen, and an ancient construction trench with the apparent beginning of an unfinished pyramid. European travellers and surveyors described the ruins during the 19th century, when Egypt's pyramids were being measured and classified. Howard Weiss and John Shea Perring recorded the area, and Carl Richard Lepsius examined it during the winter of 1842-1843. Their work established that an enormous royal monument had occupied the ridge, but could not restore its history. Exposed bedrock and low courses made incompletion seem plausible. If Giza supplied the image of a finished pyramid, Abu Rawash appeared to preserve the stage before one had risen. Flinders Petrie arranged further investigation between 1880 and 1882. His attention to dimensions added evidence. Yet the central problem remained: quarrying had made a completed building resemble a construction site. Even accurate measurements could describe the scar perfectly while leaving the vanished architecture and the order of its disappearance unresolved. The natural mound stood where an artificial core was expected, and the descending trench remained open. Displaced blocks looked as though masons had left them awaiting placement. Without a chronology for the destruction, the visible features invited the wrong sequence. A major change came in 1901 and 1902 when Émile Chassenet of the French Institute of Oriental Archaeology cleared the pyramid's eastern side. Among the debris appeared quartzite statue fragments, some carrying royal inscriptions. These pieces gave the monument a name. It could be attributed to Djedefre, son and successor of Khufu, rather than to an unknown king. The discovery transformed a strange structure into a Fourth Dynasty document, though it did not free Djedefre from the darker story built around him. The sculpture shaped interpretation. Heads, bases, and images of the royal family had been broken and displaced. Scholars could see that violence had reached the king's statues, but not when or why. Damage could be deliberate without belonging to a Fourth Dynasty purge, a distinction the site had not yet supplied. The temptation was to connect them directly to the disputed succession imagined after Khufu. Archaeology had identified Djedefre, yet the context remained uncertain. A correct name did not automatically produce a correct biography. Work resumed under Pierre Lacoue in 1912 and 1913. Pierre Montet investigated an early cemetery west of the pyramid, while Fernand Bisson de la Roque later studied the neighbouring Old Kingdom necropolis. These projects revealed that Abu Rawash was not one isolated ruin, but a landscape of burials and activity extending from Egypt's early dynastic formation through later periods. Pottery, tombs, walls, and reused spaces could belong to societies separated by millennia. For much of the 20th century, scholars worked with incomplete excavations and a monument buried beneath rubble. Architectural surveys could reconstruct possibilities, but the deepest spaces required equipment capable of moving immense blocks safely. Until the debris was removed systematically, absence kept impersonating evidence of haste. Meanwhile, the unfinished pyramid theory remained influential. Djedefre's apparently short reign seemed to explain the low core, which in turn appeared to confirm the short reign. It was a circular argument supported by the ruin's appearance rather than a demonstrated construction sequence. The decisive reassessment began in the mid-1990s through a joint mission of the French Institute and the University of Geneva, directed by Michel Valoggia. Across 13 campaigns completed in 2007, the team treated the complex as one archaeological system. Mobile cranes cleared the descending passage and central pit. Architects studied the core, while ceramic specialists dated activity. Excavation traced temples, enclosure walls, storerooms, gates, ritual spaces, and the satellite pyramid. Instead of asking why the pyramid was low, the mission asked what sequence of building, use, and dismantling had produced the ridge. That wider approach reversed the earlier image. The pyramid had a base of roughly 106 meters and an estimated height near 67 meters, close in scale to Menkaur's monument at Giza. The natural hill supplied about 44% of its mass, explaining why bedrock dominated the ruin. The surrounding complex preserved components of a functioning royal funerary foundation. Most importantly, the substructure had been systematically dismantled during Roman period exploitation. Features treated as signs of abandonment were better explained as severe quarrying. No single object carried this conclusion. A statue fragment established royal identity. A foundation line revealed a vanished wall. Pottery dated people who worked among the ruins long after Djedefre, while tool marks showed extraction rather than original shaping. The Great Hollow became evidence not of what builders failed to install, but of what later workers removed. Archaeology restored the monument by reading negative spaces as carefully as surviving stones. The reassessment also changed Djedefre's reign. If the pyramid and ceremonial system were substantially completed, he could no longer be dismissed as a brief usurper whose death stopped construction. Evidence has been interpreted as allowing at least 22 or 23 years, though chronology remains debated. A longer reign fits the work at Abu Rawash and Djedefre's participation in Khufu's funerary program. Architecture and kingship began to support a more coherent history. This recovery is not finished. Parts of the lower approach remain uncertain. Waterways have shifted and missing blocks cannot be excavated where they were reused. Urban growth and limestone exploitation threaten the wider landscape. Preservation depends on recording modest traces before they disappear: a potsherd, a bedrock cut, a patch of mortar, or a wall alignment. At a dismantled site, small evidence carries responsibilities once borne by entire buildings. Abu Rawash teaches that excavation does not simply reveal what lies buried. Sometimes it reconstructs what quarrying and earlier scholarship obscured. Perring, Lepsius, Petri, Chassina, Lacau, Monte, Bisson de la Roque, Valogia, and many unnamed workers each encountered a different portion of the monument. Conclusions changed as relationships became visible. The result is a disciplined reversal. An alleged failure becomes a completed royal project, and suspected vengeance becomes a long history of reuse. From that history, we can return to the day when the casing was intact. The ridge showed no exposed trench or broken mound. It carried a sharp pyramid above temples, walls, roads, priests, supplies, and elite tombs. Archaeology cannot replace every stone, but it can define the form they created. The task ahead is to rebuild Abu Rawash in the mind not as another great pyramid, but as Djedefre intended it to be seen from the valley, the causeway, and beneath the changing light of Ra. To rebuild Abu Rawash in the mind, begin before sunrise at the edge of the Nile floodplain. The modern city has vanished, the desert tracks are quiet, and the ridge stands as a dark mass against a paling sky. Above it rises a shape that no surviving photograph can show: Djedefre's completed pyramid, its geometry sharper than the hill beneath it, and its summit catching light before the lower ground. From this distance, the monument does not look smaller than the Great Pyramid. Height of terrain lends it an authority that measurements alone cannot describe. The first rays separate its materials. A broad lower zone of red or pink granite absorbs warm colour, while pale limestone above begins to shine. We cannot restore the precise appearance of every course, nor assume that all faces weathered identically. Yet the surviving stone and architectural evidence permit a reasonable image of deliberate contrast. The natural mound is invisible. What appears to be a single constructed mountain is actually geology enclosed within masonry, corrected by courses and hidden beneath casing. The trick is not deception in a sinister sense. It is architecture making an irregular ridge obey a perfect royal form. Approaching from below, a traveller would not simply walk straight toward the pyramid. Movement passed through a larger system whose lower elements remain less securely understood than the summit complex. An entrance temple and ascending causeway connected the monument to routes from the cultivated valley, but their original relationship to ancient water channels cannot be reconstructed in every detail. The Nile's branches shifted, deposits accumulated, and later activity disturbed the lower landscape. We can follow the intended direction more confidently than every step of the ancient journey. The causeway transformed effort into ceremony. During construction, men, provisions, tools, and selected stone moved upward along this route or related working paths. After the royal burial, processions and offerings gave the ascent a different meaning. The higher one climbed, the farther the field seemed to fall away. Behind lay villages, water, crops, and the river carrying Egypt's wealth. Ahead stood a walled precinct and the pyramid filling more of the sky. Geography turned arrival into separation from ordinary space. At the enclosure, 9 monumental entrances complicated any modern image of a single forbidden gate. Access depended upon status, purpose, route, and ritual condition. A supplier carrying jars did not move like a priest approaching a chapel, and neither followed the path imagined for the king's burial. Walls separated activities while gates connected them. Security at Abu Rawash was therefore created through controlled circulation, not through absolute exclusion. The complex had to protect sacred zones and still function every day. Within the eastern sector, buildings gathered tightly against the pyramid's overwhelming form. Houses or service spaces, shops or storage rooms, courtyards, porticos, halls, chapels, and the royal cult area organized the people and goods upon which eternity depended. Their roofs sat low beneath the sloping face. The contrast was intentional in effect, even if it arose from practical design. Human rooms remained horizontal and accessible, while the king's pyramid rose beyond ordinary scale. Priests served below a body of stone they could never command visually. Statues brought the king back down to their level. Djedefre appeared in hard stone, crowned and idealized, sometimes joined to the strength of the Sphinx. Images of royal relatives extended family into ritual space. Paint and polished surfaces would have made these figures more vivid than the broken fragments displayed today. An offering placed before them did not need to reach the sealed burial chamber physically. Through ritual, the visible image and the inaccessible royal dead belonged to one system. Nearby, the boat installation suggested movement beyond the enclosure. Whether it once held a complete vessel exactly comparable to Khufu's cannot be proved, but the boat-shaped cavity carried associations that Egyptians would have recognized: river transport, procession, divine travel, and the solar journey. The monument was fixed to a ridge, yet its symbolism allowed the king to move. Stone created permanence, the imagined vessel created passage. Together they answered the central problem of royal death: how to remain eternally established while continually joining the renewed cosmos. The smaller pyramid to the southeast added another presence. Conceived perhaps for cultic use and later adapted as a queen's burial, it shows the plan responding to human events. Its fine limestone sarcophagus, calcite canopic equipment, and a vessel inscribed with Khufu's names connected the woman buried there to the royal family, though her identity is not secure. In the reconstructed landscape, this was not a decorative miniature. It was another protected center of death, memory, and dynastic relationship within Djedefre's enclosure. At midday, the pyramid's appearance would flatten beneath harsh light. At sunset, relief returned. The western face darkened while edges held the last brightness, and the granite zone deepened in color. It is tempting to describe exactly what a priest believed while watching this change, but no surviving diary grants us that intimacy. We can say only that solar cycles structured Egyptian sacred thought, and that Djedefre's name and titulary tied him explicitly to Ra. The daily transformation of his monument supplied a visible setting for that bond. The finished pyramid corrected a modern misunderstanding about scale. At roughly 106 meters per side and an estimated 67 meters high. It was smaller than Khufu's but comparable to Menkaura's. On Egypt's highest pyramids, however, its summit commanded the wider landscape. Fourth Pyramid is a modern label, not an ancient rank. Djedefre created a distinct horizon for his kingship. Seen whole, Abu Rawash did not announce isolation or disgrace. Its route connected it with the valley. Gates admitted organized movement. Temples converted produce into offerings. Statues preserved royal presence, and a secondary pyramid held another burial. The high location separated the king without severing him from the state. This was a functioning royal funerary institution. Then the reconstruction fades. Casing is removed, rooms collapse, statues break, and the natural mound emerges from the artificial mountain. The causeway loses its destination. The open trench replaces the sealed interior. Yet holding the completed image for a moment changes the ruin permanently. Exposed rock is no longer proof that masons stopped. Empty space becomes the measure of stone taken away. Abu Rawash appears not as a failed imitation of Giza, but as a complete answer to it. That answer leads to the name popular culture gives the site Egypt's fourth pyramid. The phrase suggests that one missing member should stand beside Giza's famous three, perhaps hidden, banned, or erased. Egypt actually possesses far more than 4 pyramids, and Djedefre's belongs to a longer tradition. To understand the label's power, we must examine how distance, destruction, tourism, and appetite for forbidden places turned an archaeological ruin into a secret never concealed. The phrase Egypt's fourth pyramid sounds precise, as though Djedefre's monument were the missing final member of a famous set. It is neither an ancient name nor a useful count. Egypt contains dozens of royal pyramids, while the 3 monuments at Giza belong to one part of that history. Abu Rawash receives the number 4 because modern audiences begin with the skyline of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, then encounter another Fourth Dynasty pyramid beyond the frame. The label measures memory, not ancient architecture. Its appeal comes from absence. A fourth pyramid that looked complete would be an addition to the itinerary. A fourth pyramid reduced almost to bedrock becomes a puzzle. The eye asks why it vanished when the Giza pyramid survived. Distance strengthens the effect. Abu Rawash lies north of the celebrated plateau, outside the sequence reproduced in postcards, films, and diagrams. What tourism does not display can feel deliberately hidden, even when archaeologists have mapped, excavated, photographed, and published it. From there, the language of secrecy grows. A ruined chamber becomes an unopened chamber. Restricted access becomes a prohibition. Missing casing becomes unknown stone. A disputed reconstruction becomes evidence that authorities fear what lies below. These changes pass unnoticed in a title, but together they replace the site. The real Abu Rawash is opened, quarried, and archaeologically fragile. The legendary version is sealed, intact, and guarded. One derives its mystery from loss, the other requires people to pretend that loss never occurred. The claim that no one enters is misleading. Djedefre's substructure is not a pristine corridor ending at a door that has resisted every attempt. Later extraction removed the passage, chamber masonry, and overlying pyramid. Archaeological teams entered and cleared the exposed spaces with cranes, recorded bedrock cuttings, and studied architectural fragments. What cannot be entered like an intact tomb is, in part, no longer there. The absence of a tourist route does not restore missing ceilings and walls. Public access can be limited or unavailable. Archaeological sites close for conservation, security, excavation, staffing, nearby development, or because unstable ground makes visitors a risk. Abu Rawash is not arranged like the Giza plateau, with mass tourism, circulation, lighting, ticket infrastructure, and maintained internal passages. A traveller who reaches the ridge may encounter barriers or uncertainty. That experience is real, but it does not prove a classified chamber. Administration and secrecy are not synonyms. The monument gives officials reasons for caution. Loose stone can shift, exposed cuts collect debris, and footsteps erase surfaces preserving construction marks. Pottery fragments and small deposits may look insignificant, but establish the chronology that overturned the unfinished pyramid theory. Climbing upon the ruin can damage evidence or create falls. Protecting a site whose information survives mainly in fragments may require stricter control than protecting a massive structure whose roots have been stabilized. The forbidden stone secret follows this transformation. Abu Rawash used materials, particularly granite transported from the Aswan region, and pale limestone for casing. Their color scheme and the height of the granite courses make the monument distinctive. Yet these stones are geologically identifiable and belong to Egyptian quarry traditions. The mystery concerns procurement, placement, transport, and later reuse not a substance with impossible properties. Calling the material forbidden turns an engineering achievement into a supernatural object and removes the workers who made it possible. Popular stories exploit the modern obscurity of Djedefre's name. Because the king is less familiar than Khufu or Khafra, he can be presented as erased. Because his pyramid stands apart, he becomes rebellious. Because his statues were broken, he becomes hated. Because no mummy is identified, he becomes missing. Each statement contains reality, but the chain is unsupported. Obscurity today is not evidence of condemnation in the 26th century BCE. His cult, titulary, monument, family connections, and place in later royal memory contradict total erasure. This does not mean every sensational question should be dismissed. Dramatic claims sometimes direct attention toward genuine problems. Was the pyramid completed? How high did the granite casing rise? Did Djedefre's burial occur here? When were the statues broken? Where did removed blocks travel? Archaeology has revised several answers, and further study may revise them again. Skepticism should not freeze the site into a textbook picture. It should separate testable uncertainty from assertions designed to become immune to evidence. The difference appears in how a claim responds to discovery. If pottery dates quarrying to the Roman period, a historical hypothesis changes its account. A conspiracy story may say the pottery was planted, misdated, or irrelevant because the secret lies deeper. If excavation exposes the chamber area, the historical interpretation studies what was removed. The conspiracy moves its room behind another imagined wall. Its promised revelation retreats whenever researchers approach. The site can never disprove a secret defined only by remaining unseen. Digital media intensifies that retreat. Images of Giza are labeled Abu Rawash. Reconstructions appear without identification, and photographs of the open trench are cropped until scale becomes unclear. A title may combine Fourth Pyramid, Forbidden, and no one enters before the narration admits that the ruin has been excavated. Repetition creates familiarity, and familiarity feels like corroboration. 10 videos may descend from one exaggerated article rather than 10 independent sources. A more honest mystery survives. We do not know every stage of Djedefre's burial, the identity of the woman associated with the satellite pyramid, the appearance of all temple buildings, or the destination of most removed stone. The lower approach and ancient waterways remain incompletely reconstructed. The king's reign length is debated. These uncertainties are bounded by evidence. They invite measurement, excavation, comparison, and the possibility that a favored explanation will fail. Abu Rawash is not a secret that Egypt buried. It is a monument history unbuilt and archaeology partially recovered. Its limited visibility results from geography, preservation, and Giza's overwhelming fame. Its restricted spaces reflect vulnerability more than fear. Its missing chamber is an archaeological loss, not an unopened vault. Once these distinctions are restored, the ridge becomes compelling because every fragment has passed through construction, ritual use, robbery, quarrying, rediscovery, and modern storytelling. That layered journey is the opposite of concealment. The site has been repeatedly exposed, reinterpreted, and transformed, leaving researchers with too much disturbance rather than one untouched secret still waiting below. The label Fourth Pyramid can serve as an invitation if treated as a doorway rather than a conclusion. It draws the gaze beyond Giza's silhouettes toward another experiment in Fourth Dynasty kingship. Comparison then becomes essential. Djedefre did not build in isolation. His choices answered Khufu's monument, preceded Khafra's return to Giza, and belonged to a family whose pyramids altered the relationship between ruler, landscape, labor, and the sun. The question is not why Egypt forbade Abu Rawash, but what this pyramid reveals when placed among the royal projects of its age. Placed among the royal projects of its age, Abu Rawash stops looking like an exception and begins to reveal how experimental the Fourth Dynasty truly was. Yet the dynasty did not follow a single architectural plan. Each king inherited techniques, labor systems, religious language, and family memory, then rearranged them to define his own reign. Khufu's Great Pyramid established the most demanding point of comparison: its enormous base, carefully oriented faces, internal chambers, temples, causeway, and associated boats transformed Giza into a landscape of royal power. Djedefre did not need to repeat that scale to prove legitimacy. He had already participated in his father's funerary arrangements, as inscriptions connected with Khufu's boat pits indicate. His own challenge was to follow an achievement that could not easily be surpassed. Moving north may have offered a way to answer Khufu without becoming merely the builder of a smaller monument beside him. Abu Rawash supplied that answer through elevation. Djedefre's pyramid had a base of roughly 106 meters and an estimated height near 67 meters, far below Khufu's original dimensions. From parts of the valley, Djedefre's summit stood extraordinarily high, and the monument commanded northern approaches to the Memphite region. The site converted natural topography into royal scale. Instead of assembling all height from quarried blocks, builders enclosed a substantial bedrock mound and allowed the landscape itself to carry the king upward. Egyptian pyramid builders repeatedly worked with natural ground, cutting, leveling, filling, and incorporating rock where useful. At Abu Rawash, the proportion was unusually dramatic. The hill formed about 44% of the pyramid's mass. That choice reduced the amount of masonry required while creating difficult surveying problems. A rough, irregular core had to disappear beneath regular courses and smooth casing. Efficiency and ambition operated together. The monument saved material without looking economical when complete. Its stones also placed Djedefre within a family tradition, while giving his pyramid a distinct appearance. Khufu's monument had fine, pale casing, and granite served critical spaces within the complex. Djedefre appears to have raised red or pink granite casing through several lower courses, perhaps at least 8, before pale limestone continued above. Menkaure later used granite extensively around the lower portion of his Giza pyramid. Khafre's return to Giza is often treated as a verdict against Abu Rawash. It need not be. His pyramid occupied high ground near Khufu, and its placement created the familiar visual dialogue between two enormous monuments. Because Khafre's foundation stands higher, his pyramid can appear to rival or exceed his father's, even though it was slightly smaller. Djedefre had used the same broad principle on a more distant ridge. Topography could magnify architecture. The brothers or close relatives may have chosen different sites, but both understood that a pyramid was seen as part of a horizon, not as dimensions written on a plan. Their complexes also demonstrate continuity. Each royal pyramid belonged to temples, controlled approaches, offering institutions, storage, sculpture, and subsidiary burials. Abu Rawash's 9 gates and complicated enclosure plan make it distinctive, yet its purpose was recognizable. It transformed the dead ruler into the center of a maintained cult. Priests, estates, supplies, and royal images connected burial to government long after construction ended. Djedefre did not reject the pyramid system. He used it to state his place within the dynasty and the divine order. The strongest innovation appears in royal language. By adopting Son of Ra as a formal title, Djedefre expressed the king's relationship with the sun god more explicitly than his predecessors had done. His name also invoked Ra, while the high site placed the pyramid within an expansive field of light. We should not claim that this proves a precise astronomical scheme, or that solar religion began at Abu Rawash. Later developments show how consequential that combination was. Fifth Dynasty rulers built sun temples and strengthened institutions devoted to Ra, while continuing to construct pyramids for their burials. Djedefre stands near the beginning of that clearer solar emphasis, but not outside earlier Egyptian religion. He linked an established royal monument to an evolving definition of divine descent. Abu Rawash therefore belongs in the history of ideas as much as in the history of engineering. Its missing mass can obscure that contribution because theology leaves fewer visible blocks than architecture. Menkaure's smaller pyramid further warns against reading size as political strength. His monument remained a legitimate royal center, despite being much reduced from those of Khufu and Khafre. Changes in scale could reflect resources, reign length, design priorities, institutional development, or choices that no surviving text explains. Djedefre's complex was substantial enough to perform its funerary and political work, and its high position gave it a visibility disproportionate to its dimensions. Survival has nevertheless created a false hierarchy. Khufu and Khafra appear powerful because their cores still dominate Giza. Djedefre appears marginal because quarrymen removed most of his. If the histories of preservation were reversed, popular memory might tell a different dynasty. A brilliant northern pyramid of the son of Ra contrasted with damaged remains farther south. Archaeological importance cannot be assigned according to which monuments supplied later builders with the fewest reusable stones. What survives is a sample shaped by geography, demand, access, and chance. The comparison also weakens the idea of a family rupture. Djedefre honoured Khufu, used the pyramid tradition, and was followed by rulers who developed related forms and titles. Differences in location do not prove rebellion, just as Khafra's return does not prove revenge. Royal succession may have contained rivalry, negotiation, and uncertainty. Courts rarely lacked them. But the evidence at Abu Rawash points toward continuity strong enough to mobilize labor, establish a cult, and preserve Djedefre's name. A violent tale cannot be built securely from architectural variety. Seen in this wider frame, the Fourth Pyramid is neither an excluded member of Giza nor an isolated experiment. It is one turn in a dynasty's sustained effort to remake kingship through stone. Khufu pushed mass and precision to an extreme. Djedefre used elevation, coloured material, and a newly explicit solar title. Khafre returned to Giza and manipulated higher ground beside his predecessor. Menkaure altered scale while preserving the royal complex. Their monuments were answers to common problems, not repeated solutions. Abu Rawash reveals that the Pyramid Age was alive with choice. Builders balanced natural rock against transported stone, inherited ritual against new titles, visibility against access, and family continuity against individual identity. Djedefre's answer was almost erased materially, yet enough remains to recover its logic. The final questions now sharpen. Was he actually buried beneath the pyramid? What can the empty chamber prove? Which parts of his biography remain uncertain? And which sensational claims can be rejected to reach a verdict? We must separate what Abu Rawash demonstrates from what even its restored history cannot tell us. Was Djedefre actually buried at Abu Rawash? The most responsible answer is that the complex was designed for his burial and probably received it. But no surviving body or undisturbed burial deposit proves the event directly. Archaeology can identify intention with considerable confidence. Confirming the final ceremony amid robbery and quarrying is harder. The architecture begins the case. A descending passage led toward a central pit cut into the ridge, where the burial apartments were constructed within and over bedrock. The arrangement belonged to the developing Fourth Dynasty tradition, even though its open trench now looks unlike the enclosed passages at Giza. Temple rooms, offering spaces, enclosure walls, a causeway, royal sculpture, and a maintained mortuary cult surrounded this core. Such an institution was not built merely to display a pyramid from the valley. It existed to transform and serve a dead king. Yet the chamber visible today cannot be treated as Djedefre left it. Later workers removed masonry from the pit, dismantled structural elements, and opened spaces that had originally been roofed and sealed. The modern visitor therefore sees the negative form of the burial system: cuts where blocks once rested, surfaces where walls met rock, and hollows enlarged by extraction. Asking why the chamber is empty without first restoring what quarrymen removed is like entering the foundations of a demolished palace and concluding that its rooms were never furnished. No intact royal sarcophagus has been recovered from the main pyramid. No securely identified mummy of Djedefre has been found, and no surviving collection of burial goods can be placed around his body. These absences prevent certainty, but they are not unexpected. A royal burial advertised concentrated wealth to ancient robbers. Precious objects could disappear first, followed by stone fittings valuable to later builders. At Abu Rawash, the destruction went beyond theft inside a tomb and consumed much of the tomb itself. The missing body carries especially little power as evidence. Even in pyramids whose use is accepted, royal remains are often absent, displaced, fragmentary, or impossible to identify. Mummies could be damaged during robbery, moved by priests, scattered through later disturbance, or removed without a record that survives. A mummy discovered without inscriptions would also create an identification problem. Modern audiences imagine a named body as the final proof of a king, but Old Kingdom archaeology rarely offers that convenient union of person, inscription, and untouched chamber. Could Djedefre have been buried elsewhere in principle? Yes. Kings could alter plans, die away from their monument, or face political and practical complications. Archaeology should never turn probability into an eyewitnessed account. Yet no alternative tomb has been identified that fits Djedefre better than Abu Rawash. Proposals that he was excluded from his own complex usually depend on the older belief that the pyramid remained unfinished, or that Khafra overthrew him. Once substantial completion and a functioning cult are recognized, those proposals lose much of their foundation. Reign length also affects the question. If Djedefre ruled only briefly, builders might have rushed to make the monument usable before every decorative element was complete. If the higher year counts associated with him reflect a reign of roughly 2 decades. There was far more time for construction and burial preparation. The chronology remains debated, so it cannot close the case. Either way, Egyptian royal projects prioritized essential funerary spaces. A pyramid complex did not need every surface perfected before it could receive a king. The cult provides evidence of use after death, though not a record of the burial procession. Priests served Djedefre. Offerings supported his transformed presence, and family associations continued around the complex. This would be difficult to reconcile with the strongest version of the revenge story, in which his successor immediately declared him illegitimate and abandoned the ridge. A mortuary cult could operate even if circumstances had prevented burial. But its survival shows that Djedefre remained an acknowledged deceased king, not a name universally condemned. Royal statues strengthen identification without solving the chamber. They placed Djedefre within the ritual architecture and allowed offerings, speech, and divine service to reach him symbolically. Their later fragmentation once appeared to document an early attack. Disturbed contexts make that date uncertain. The statues tell us whose institution this was. They do not tell us whether robbers found a wrapped royal body below. Different categories of evidence answer different questions, and the temptation to make one fragment explain the entire biography should be resisted. The safest verdict, therefore, has several layers. Abu Rawash was Djedefre's royal pyramid complex. Its principal substructure was intended as his burial place. The monument was substantially completed enough to function, and his mortuary cult endured. Djedefre was probably buried there, but the final interment has not been directly demonstrated by an intact sarcophagus, body, or sealed deposit. Later destruction explains the missing evidence better than an abandoned project does, although it cannot restore absolute certainty. That conclusion also changes the meaning of the open pit. It is not a doorway authorities refuse to unlock, And it is not proof that workers stopped before creating a chamber. It is a damaged architectural record. Bedrock cuttings reveal the builder's sequence, while missing masonry measures the appetite of later quarrymen. The most important evidence lies not behind an imagined secret door but along contact surfaces, tool marks, mortar traces, displaced blocks, and pottery deposited by people who entered the ruin long after the king. Several mysteries therefore remain legitimate. We do not know the exact appearance of the burial apartments, the full inventory prepared for Djedefre, the date of the first robbery, or the route taken by most reused blocks. We cannot name the woman in the satellite pyramid with confidence, reconstruct every stage of the lower causeway, or assign all statue damage to one episode. These are losses produced by time, not coded invitations to invent a forbidden civilization. The burial question brings the investigation close to its final balance. Djedefre was not securely exposed as a murdered usurper, nor was his pyramid an impossible structure hidden from the public. He was a Fourth Dynasty king who completed a daring monument on a high northern ridge, tied his identity more explicitly to Ra, and probably entered the burial system built in his name. The monument then passed from sacred institution to robbed tomb, quarry, archaeological problem, and modern legend. One final return to Abu Rawash can now gather those transformations into a single view. We can stand above the exposed trench without mistaking damage for design, look toward Giza without reading distance as rebellion, and examine red granite without calling it forbidden. What remains is not the secret Egypt tried to bury, but the evidence history nearly dismantled completely, and the quieter revelation that a lost pyramid can be recovered without pretending its missing king has been found. Return to the ridge one last time, with the pyramid's long history now restored around the exposed trench. The first impression remains severe. Bedrock rises where a smooth face once stood, broken masonry gathers along the slopes, and the central cut opens to the sky. Giza's three great silhouettes are distant enough to seem part of another landscape, yet almost everything that once made Abu Rawash appear sinister has changed meaning. The separation from Giza no longer proves exile. The open substructure no longer proves abandonment. The missing casing no longer points to a forbidden material. Ruin is not the monument's original condition, and absence is not a secret simply because it invites one. What the ridge demonstrates is more disciplined and more impressive. Djedefre, son and successor of Khufu, chose Egypt's highest known pyramid site and used its natural mound as part of the core. Builders surveyed an irregular hill, cut passages into bedrock, raised masonry around it, and converted geology into a controlled geometric form. The finished pyramid probably stood about 67 meters high on a base roughly 106 meters square. It was not another great pyramid, but it did not need to be. Elevation gave it a reach that raw dimensions conceal, allowing its summit to command the northern horizon and meet the sun before much of the land below. Its surface expressed that choice through familiar Egyptian stone. Local limestone supplied mass. Finer pale limestone gave brightness. Red or pink granite transported from the Aswan region strengthened and distinguished important zones, apparently rising through several lower casing courses, perhaps at least 8. None of this material requires a lost technology or unknown substance. The achievement lies in quarrying, transport, measurement, fitting, and the coordination of human effort across enormous distances. Even the most dramatic recent possibility that some granite was later carried to Alexandria and reused in the pharaohs or its successors remains a hypothesis awaiting secure provenance, not proof of a concealed history. Around the pyramid, the supposed forbidden place becomes a busy institution. A causeway connects the ridge to the lower landscape. Enclosure walls and 9 gates organize movement rather than prevent all entry. Temples, storerooms, service areas, statues, offering spaces, a boat installation, and a smaller pyramid create a ceremonial system in which priests, administrators, suppliers, and royal relatives all have roles. Djedefre's monument is therefore not an isolated heap built by a king who vanished before completion. It is the center of a mortuary cult designed to preserve him as a legitimate ruler after death. Whether his body was finally placed beneath it cannot be proved with an intact mummy or sealed burial deposit. The architecture strongly identifies the intended royal tomb, and the functioning cult makes interment probable. Later robbery and quarrying explain why direct proof disappeared. That careful conclusion may sound less exciting than an unopened chamber, but it respects what the site can actually tell us. Archaeology does not become weaker when it admits the boundary between probability and certainty. It becomes possible to distinguish a genuine unanswered question from a claim constructed so that no evidence can ever reach it. The same boundary dissolves the story of dynastic revenge. Djedefre's move north, Khafra's return to Giza, and the fragmentation of royal statues once formed a compelling tragedy when placed in a convenient order. But no surviving decree records Khafra condemning his predecessor. No systematic erasure removed Djedefre from royal memory, and his cult continued. The broken sculpture came from disturbed contexts, while much architectural destruction belongs to quarrying thousands of years after the Fourth Dynasty. Rivalry may have existed at court, but the evidence does not support using it as the master explanation for the ruin. Time, rather than one enemy, dismantled Abu Rawash. Robbers sought burial wealth. Later workers discovered a supply of dressed limestone and costly granite, already separated into reusable blocks. Greek and Roman period pottery and working debris record substantial activity among the remains, and extraction continued through later centuries into modern times. Each campaign inherited a monument made easier to quarry by the campaign before it. Courses disappeared, walls lost support, chambers opened, and the natural hill slowly emerged. By the time early surveyors arrived, the quarry had rewritten the building so thoroughly that completion looked like interruption. Modern archaeology reversed that illusion through accumulation rather than revelation. Royal inscriptions identified Djedefre. Foundation lines restored temples and enclosure walls. Pottery separated Old Kingdom ritual from later occupation. Tool marks and missing settings exposed dismantling. Cranes cleared spaces that sensational accounts would later call inaccessible. No single discovery rebuilt the pyramid, but relationships among small traces recovered its sequence construction: cult, robbery, extraction, rediscovery, and reinterpretation. The site's deepest lesson may be methodological. A dramatic ruin must be dated, not merely described, because damage separated from chronology can be made to support almost any story. This is also why limited public access proves so little. Abu Rawash is fragile, uneven, and not equipped like the Giza Plateau for mass tourism. Barriers may protect unstable ground, excavation areas, or traces easily erased beneath a foot. Archaeologists have nevertheless entered and recorded the foundation trench, descending route, and chamber area. There is no pristine inner corridor waiting behind an official door. Much of the architecture that would have enclosed such a route was removed. The paradox is simple people imagine an untouched secret because the site has been touched, opened, and dismantled almost beyond recognition. Djedefre's true legacy survives in choices once obscured by that destruction. He adopted the title Son of Ra, placed his monument high within an expansive solar landscape, and created a coloured pyramid whose lower granite and upper limestone would have changed under the day's light. He inherited Khufu's world without copying it, and the kings who followed continued to reshape the relationship among pyramids, topography, ritual, and divine descent. Abu Rawash was not excluded from the Pyramid Age. It reveals that the age was never architecturally uniform. The final verdict therefore refuses both dismissal and exaggeration. Abu Rawash was a substantially completed royal pyramid complex, probably Djedefre's burial place, later robbed and systematically quarried. Its stone was remarkable in cost and use, not supernatural in composition. Its separation from Giza expressed a royal choice, not demonstrated banishment. Its open pit is the remainder of lost architecture, not an untouched chamber. Questions remain about the exact burial, the woman in the satellite pyramid, the lower approach, the chronology of early damage, and the destinations of removed blocks. Those mysteries are enough. They preserve curiosity without requiring Egypt to hide what history itself destroyed. Its recovery replaces a theatrical secret with a more demanding historical achievement. Word count 1110. As evening settles over Abu Rawash, the ridge loses the harsh clarity of noon. Tool marks soften, broken blocks merge with the ground, and the exposed trench becomes a darker shape within the stone. Far to the south, the pyramids of Giza hold the last light a little longer. Djedefre's monument can no longer answer them with a shining face, yet its absence has acquired an outline. The mine supplies pale limestone above deep red granite, a sharp summit over the valley, and quiet temple courts at the foot of the slope. The workers who created that horizon are gone. So are the priests who carried offerings through its gates, the boat crews who brought stone north from Aswan, and the quarrymen who returned centuries later to carry those same blocks away. Each group knew a different Abu Rawash. For one generation it was a rising royal mountain. For another it was a sacred institution. For others it became an old ruin, a source of valuable material, a place to measure, or a puzzle to excavate. Time did not preserve one meaning, it layered them, then broke the layers apart. A king sought permanence, but permanence survived less in the stone than in traces of decisions a line cut into bedrock. Mortar beneath a vanished corpse, a name on a statue fragment, a potsherd left by someone working among ruins already ancient. These modest things returned a lost pyramid to history. And so the ridge grows quiet again. There is no sealed door to force open, no forbidden stone waiting to overturn the past, only a landscape that asks for patience. The mystery remains, but it has changed. It is no longer why no one may enter. It is how human labour could raise such a monument, how other hands could almost erase it, and how careful attention could make its vanished form visible once more. The last light leaves the summit that is no longer there. Below, the Nile Valley darkens, the desert releases the day's heat, and Abu Rawash becomes a silhouette. Above it, stars appear where the lost apex once met the sky, indifferent to royal names yet faithful to the ancient rhythm that gave Djedefre's chosen landscape much of its meaning and enduring calm. Somewhere within that darkness lies the memory of a pyramid built for the son of Ra, not hidden, not forbidden, but altered by thousands of years, waiting quietly in the evidence that survived.